We've got 4 readings for today. The first coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 7. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And then you've got Romans chapter 5, verses 6 to 8. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Matthew 5, verses 43 to 48. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And then you've got 1 John chapter 4, verses 19 to 21. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister, whom they have seen, cannot love God, who is unseen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister.
So, obviously, our topic today is very different to last week, and maybe not one you'd expect to be in a series looking at controversial topics, because we've looked at things like abortion and pride, and these are clearly issues that cause not just division between the church and the world, but even cause division within the church itself. And this is because these are obviously very big issues, and the way our society views these things and how the Bible speaks of them is very different from each other. So depending on what you focus on the most as a Christian and as a church, what you focus on the most, is it the Bible or is it society? Well, that's always going to shape your position on such issues, as it is not possible to hold both to God's word and also agree with the views of the world when it comes to those kind of topics. The world, the Bible, they're just very different. And that's why it can even cause confusion and division amongst those in the church itself. But with this topic today, the obvious question is, what could be the issue with love? What could make that controversial? Because all churches would agree that we are called to love our neighbor. That's very obvious. And even in the world, the idea of loving others and finding love is not something that the world speaks against. So if we all agree that love is good, then how do we get to be looking at this today as being something controversial that is an issue that needs to be spoken of and cleared up? Well, the problem is something that actually connects in with what we have looked at with those other controversial issues, the ones that do cause the obvious problems. Because when you look at them, we find that at the heart of what's going on there and why they're controversial is actually how we come to view and understand this topic of love. That depending on what we think love is, will be the thing that impacts those other issues, and it will then lead us to responding to them either one way or another. So, for example, the justification for abortion is often argued as being an act of love, that it is love for the mother. It's making her life easy by not forcing her to have a baby that she doesn't want. That it's love for women in general. It's a rights issue, and it's protecting that right of women. And it's even argued as being loving for the child that would have been, because why bring someone into the world who is simply not wanted or can't be cared for? That is such a cruel thing to do. So to terminate the baby, it's actually an act of love and kindness. So the argument is abortion is actually a good thing, and that is because it is a loving thing to do, even if it is murder. And of course, pride, as we looked at last week, is obviously all about love as well, because the entire thing from the start has been about gay marriage with the argument that love is love. So who is anyone to say that their love is wrong? And even more so, to not support someone in what is their life choice and what they think is right for them would be therefore unloving. That if you don't agree with how they choose to love, then you are not a loving person and you're not loving them as a person. And therefore it's you who doesn't understand what love is, and that's why you can't show it. So just in those two issues, we're already seeing that lots of people do not agree with what love is, because we find that even an unloving act can actually be argued as a good thing, as it usually comes down to all about affirming people's choices and their feelings, and therefore that is love. And to disagree with that, even if it's genuinely out of love for those involved, well, that now gets labelled as not love, but it gets called hate, and therefore it is a lack of love. And it's this disagreement as to what love is that becomes a problem in general. Because what we find is that fake love actually fills our world and is the love that our society holds onto. Which is why when you watch most romantic movies, they are anything but real love. Because they're often filled with betrayal and cheating and manipulation. They'll be filled with some kind of love bombing and just romance run wild without actually knowing the person or caring about that. And even abuse gets seen and portrayed as being romantic. So they all get called love, despite obviously being no such thing. Because in the end, anything seen as being passion in our society today, even though the word passion had a very different meaning originally, but today, anything seen as being passionate and intense is seen as being all good and therefore deep emotional love, no matter how wrong that might play out and how wrong the things that are supposedly being loved may be. And why it gets seen that way is because from the mindset that our society often has, love is understood as nothing but a feeling. So there really is no right and wrong. It's not about what is best and love that actually endures. Instead, it's about, does this make me happy? And if so, then that must be love. Happiness becomes love beyond all else. So if it feels right, it must be good and true. But the problem then is, as our society gets this so wrong, this issue of fake love, well, it now even fills many churches today. Because, as Jesus said, love your neighbor and don't judge. Well, because of that, now many people start to believe that simply being nice and therefore making people happy makes for loving them. It makes for being a loving church. That it's not speaking truth or rebuking people or having a standard for God's people. In fact, probably the opposite, because just being nice is what now equals being loving. That Christian love is about making people's lives feel better, even above making their lives actually better. But that's not what the Bible says. Because when we look at God's word, we come to see it's the opposite of that. It is about truth. And it is about what is right, because love is shown to be something far more than just making people happy, and it's more than just being nice. And when we reduce it down to those things, we actually lose what the gospel is all about, which is why the love of the gospel is often so different to the love we see, unfortunately, in many churches these days. even to the extent that many Christians, if they stopped and thought about it, by their standards, their understanding of love, they would actually find Jesus unloving and the gospel an offense. That they've now created such a wrong idea about what love is, that Jesus's harsh rebukes and even flipping tables would be considered hateful and evil. And if we were to get to that point, we then lose what love really is and what it is that Jesus has done for us and what he was doing by those rebukes and flipping tables. Because there is nothing nice about what happened on the cross. And yet it is the most loving thing that has ever been done, and we can lose seeing the love in it when we get a completely wrong and even worldly idea of what love is. So to get started, we'll first need to look at what a wrong view of love is and how and why it is so many churches and Christians today often do get love wrong. Because the misunderstanding that happens often comes from having an overemphasis on some traits and actions of love. And then when that happens, forgetting what the foundation of love really is. And we can see this and how this comes about by looking at what was our first reading, which is without doubt one of the most well-known passages in the entire Bible. Because this is the one that gets used in weddings, and people stick it on social media posts to be encouraging and uplifting. And it even gets used by non-Christians as some sort of higher calling of what love is all about. So we read here, 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 to 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. So here we get what is a pretty good definition of what love is, because we get a list of things about how love gets shown, and it speaks of things like it being patience and kindness, being trusting. And on top of this, we also get told what love should not be. It should not be envious, proud, selfish, nor should it be angry and cruel to others. So with it laid out so clearly, with this clear contrast of good and bad, when people read this, they immediately think the way to love others is to do these good things. And it's also, of course, not to do these bad things, because they would be the opposite of love. And this therefore means that failing to do the right things and doing any of the wrong things would be showing a lack of love. It's as simple as that. Be kind, be patient, don't be envious, don't be angry. And whilst this is true to an extent, the problem with this simple list and then living by it, this is how we have unfortunately ended up with a very fake and shallow kind of love in Christian circles, in churches today. And worse still, why we have ended up with a total absence of love despite seemingly showing these traits that are listed here, doing what the list simply says. And there's a reason why this has happened. How people reading passages like this have ended up getting it so wrong. Because the truth is, patience is not love. And kindness is not love. In fact, most of the things that we say are love are themselves not actually love. And that is because love has to be the foundation that these things stem from. And you can't reverse the order. Love leads to these, and love shows itself as these things, but these are not in themselves love. So, for example, to help understand this and how it's not a two-way street and how one does not always lead to the other, I could say that a dog is a mammal because that is what it is, right? It's not a fish, it's not a reptile, it's simply a mammal. But whilst that is true, I cannot say that a mammal is a dog because a cat or a dolphin or a rat, they're all mammals. So whilst you can say it one way, a dog is a mammal, that's true, you cannot declare that mammals are dogs, right? It does not work both ways. And it's a very similar thing here. Love is patient, but patience does not mean love. Because you could be patient and kind and a number of other things to someone and yet not love them. So walk in, for example, a cafe or catch a plane, and you expect the staff should be patient and they should be kind. But it does not mean that they love you, right? That's a different thing altogether. Because love must come first, and then it will show itself in the ways that we see in this Corinthians passage. And if you reverse it, you can end up looking loving without actually loving the people you are being kind and patient with. And this here is where many churches have gotten this concept of love simply wrong, because they'll focus on the kindness and the patience and be clear that we must not be boastful or angry with others. And then by doing these things and sticking to 1 Corinthians 13, they now believe that they are being loving. And we see this issue play out in a number of ways. There are a lot of examples of how fake love creeps into churches and fits with this passage, but is not actually real love. So for one, and something we looked at last week, as was mentioned at the start, is that many churches in the name of love will turn a blind eye to sin so as not cause offense. They're supposedly out of love. They'll not tell people that they need to repent because being kind and polite and nice and not hurting their feelings is seen as being the most important thing. So they forget that true love puts the other person's interests and well-being first, and also forget that true love to God is upholding his ways and it's serving him and it is living by his word. And this happens because in the name of love, they put what should be done, loving the other person so much that you're prepared to cause an offense so as to put them on the right path, but they now put that to the side as it's seen as more important to be kind than to be truly loving. And as that becomes the issue, this need for peace and kindness above all else, this issue also shows up in other parts of churches as well. Because it's not uncommon for some of the most welcoming churches to actually be the most unloving. Because whilst they may be very friendly and they'll have a large, well-structured, welcoming team, and they've got a system set up for following up with new people and running special groups that integrate these new people into the church. Whilst this all feels very loving and welcoming, in reality, it's actually very corporate and fake. Because in many ways, there's no more love in doing this than just, say, a large company just trying to get your business. Because those companies also make easy pathways to get you in the door and hopefully keep you there, but they don't care about the person when they do this. That's not why they're doing it at all. That at the end of the day, a business only wants your money, so they'll be welcoming and kind and patient to get you in, but they don't care about you as a person. That is not their motive. And churches, unfortunately, can end up just like that, wanting to show love to new people, but not for the person's sake, but to show that they are loving and welcoming. And it's why, therefore, they can be the coldest churches when that person leaves, or perhaps if they just don't quite fit in. And that's because they never actually loved the person. They just had a good system set up in order to welcome them in and to show the kind of love that you see in 1 Corinthians. And it's also the same issue at play, that when conflict does happen, that this is often why there is a lack of justice in churches that get love wrong. That it often ends up with the troublemaker being given forgiveness and patience despite the harm being done to others, or it becomes a compromise of saying, well, none of us are perfect, so let's all shake hands and learn to love and be patient with one another, despite one person being the obvious problem. Because this is also what happens when we misunderstand 1 Corinthians 13. That instead of seeing it as love will look like this, patience, kindness, trusting, and not being envious, proud, selfish, we end up focusing only on the traits and being like those things, showing the kindness and patience, and not the actual love itself. That those kind of behaviors and those actions, they don't come from love, but it only gives the appearance of what love would look like, hence why it's so easy for justice to not be done. And it is a really big issue when we get this wrong, as it impacts more than just how we treat others. Because if we do get this wrong, and we are treating people not with love, but just the acts of it, then we can also do that with God. We can end up with the same fake love towards God as well. And this is why God ended up saying to the Israelites, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And he said that because he knew what was in their hearts. They did the actions, they had the traits of worshiping and loving God. They're ticking the boxes like a lot of churches do today with Corinthians 13, but they're not actually loving God. And as mentioned before, Jesus flipped tables when he saw what they were doing in the temple because of how fake it all was and how it wasn't real love, despite their actions trying to show that they did. And as he flipped those tables, as also mentioned at the start, that kind of behavior was done out of love, and yet it would probably not be something that many people in churches today would approve of. In fact, they might even see that as being unloving. That for many Christians, it would come as a surprise. Many of the things that Jesus said and did, because when they think of Jesus, they see him as being perfectly loving. And when they think of perfect love, for them, it means being kind and patient above all else. But as mentioned, why Jesus did this and why he said many of the things he did was because it was fake love being displayed and not the true love that should have been happening. And God's people should have had that love for others. And Jesus, out of love for them, needed to make it known. He needed to show them what it really means to love God, what real love is. Now, of course, this therefore raises the question. If we come to see that kindness and patience are not love in themselves, and you can do those things without truly loving another person, then the question is, what then is love? Right? What should a proper understanding of true love be? And how can you tell when someone is being loving as opposed to just being kind? And the simple answer is that God has shown this to us. That the perfect demonstration of love is in the gospel itself, because this could have only happened because there is genuine love for another. That's what's at the heart of it. And we see this in our second passage, okay, the one from Romans, because without genuine love, it is simply not possible for any of the gospel to happen, as it was only a true act of love that we could have our sins paid for. So we read this in Romans 5, in verse 6. You see, at just the right time, when we're still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. So we firstly see that we're in a hopeless and lost state, and we were not in a right relationship with God. And it was at that point that Christ died to save us. But when we had no right or leverage over him, there was no claim that could be made, that is when Christ died. And then it says this, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, but for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So what we're clearly seeing here is that we're not deserving of Christ's death. That we're sinners. We've rejected God and his ways. We're not good people. We don't deserve anything. So we've not earned Jesus' death for us, as it's something we don't actually deserve. Which is why we say, when we speak of the gospel and what God has done for us and what Jesus did for us, we say that it's a gift, right? That it's not a wage. It's not something owed to us for our good works. And that's because, as it says here, whilst we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And it's by that point there that God demonstrates love. That's where we see what love really is. Because what this is talking about is sacrifice. It's giving to someone what they don't deserve, and doing so at a personal cost. Because the Father gives his Son for us. And his Son lays down his life so we will be saved from death. It comes at a cost and is a sacrifice. And that type of love, to do such a thing for us, that love cannot come from kindness alone. Because as I said before, the person at the cafe may be kind and patient with you, but they're not going to die for you. They'll not sacrifice for you. They're kind and patient as that's simply a requirement of their job, and they want to keep their job and they want to keep getting paid for it, which may not happen if they're not kind and patient to their customers. But that means there's no sacrifice going on there. It's just an act of kindness and there's another motive behind it. But as I said before, you can be kind and patient and not loving. But the sacrifice for another, to put their needs before your own, and to do that at a cost, and especially if I haven't earned it and might not even return the favor, well, that comes at a personal expense, and that can only come from real love for that person. Because if there's no love, then to put others before yourself and to sacrifice for them at your expense is simply not going to happen. So sacrifice, not kindness, is the very foundation of love. And we see this kind of love of Jesus, the willingness to sacrifice, being spoken of in many places. And it shows what kind of love was at play and how that is what drove him to die for us. Because we see him famously saying, John 10 in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. So here we see the image of a shepherd protecting the sheep and being willing to put their own life on the line in order to protect the sheep. In fact, within this passage, we see him go on to immediately say, the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and he cares nothing for the sheep. So in this situation, the hired hand is like the cafe worker, right? It's just a job. They're just doing it for the money. He looks after the sheep, but he doesn't love them. So he won't sacrifice for them any more than someone serving you a coffee would. And we see this willingness of Jesus to sacrifice for us as the good shepherd out of love being spoken of elsewhere. Because we read in John 10, further down, verses 17 and 18, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, I'm going to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. So we can see that this death is a choice by Jesus and that his sacrifice, it's not being forced. That it happens because of both his love for the Father who sends him and the Son does his will, and out of love for us as he chooses to die for our sake. He dies for his sheep. Which is why we see this being stated clearly in Mark 10, verse 45, as Jesus explains the nature of how he comes and how it is for our sake. Because he says here, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So there is the sacrificial love being spoken of, and how it is not for his benefit, but it's for ours. That's not based on us being deserving, nor is it something that he now gets from us. Instead, we give nothing, and Jesus gives everything for us. That we clearly did not earn this, nor do we get to pay it back in any way. Instead, it's the gift spoken of before, as he gives his life, and by doing so, he is sacrificing for us. But in order for that to happen, it had to come from him loving us like the shepherd loves his sheep. Which is why this is what we have to see love as. Not kindness, not patience. Because whilst those things will come from love, and if you have love, you will from that be kind and be patient to those you love. But to sacrifice, especially for those who do not deserve it, that is the very meaning of love. That can't happen without love. Because you can be kind to someone who you don't love, but you won't sacrifice for someone unless you love them. And if there is no will to sacrifice, then there is no love. You can't love another if you have no drive to act for their sake. So that is the answer to the question, what then is love? It is sacrifice. It's the desire to put another's needs and willingness above our own. And this idea of being sacrifice, being love, it is something that we all probably know is true, just from our own experiences. Because the friends and the family that you know love you are the ones who will or have sacrificed for you. And the ones who haven't are the ones that leave you feeling unloved. And it sometimes comes as a surprise, because they're the ones that you might have thought loved you most, but when it came at a cost to them, they left you high and dry. So people can be the nicest and most patient people you know and be even that way to you, but you won't know they love you until you see that they're prepared to sacrifice for you. Because without sacrifice, there simply is no love there. Which now leads to our next passages and what is the practical part of this for us. Because we've looked at two things so far, both a fake love that looks nice but has no depth and it's just ticking off the kind of things that 1 Corinthians 13 speaks of, and also real love that comes from actual sacrifice and has been demonstrated to us by Christ. But now we have to look at how we are to demonstrate this kind of love. What would it look like for Christians to love like Jesus does? And we see this all being spelled out in our Matthew passage, because here we'll see sacrificial love in action and also a warning as to why we can deceive ourselves into thinking that we are loving, even when there is no sacrifice in it. So we read in Matthew 5 from verse 43, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." So we see a very big thing being said here, that we're not to hate enemies and the ones who persecute us, but instead we're to love them. That this is the radical love of Christianity, because this is the love that Jesus showed. This is what he did for us. As we saw before, we were God's enemies. We're the ones who hated him. And yet despite that, as we see in the famous John 3:16, God loved us so much that he sent his son to die for us. So that's what it looks like to love your enemies. And that's what sacrifice looks like. They hate you, and yet instead of getting even, you love them anyway. That's what Jesus did for us. And we see this love of God for both friend and enemy in action in this world even today. And it's even beyond the saving work of the gospel. Because Jesus now says he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. And he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So here's another example of how we don't earn God's love, because he gives blessing to everyone, even those who hate him. He's showing love to his enemies. And this is what now leads into Jesus now showing how sacrificial love is the only kind of love, because as we looked at before, just being kind and patient without sacrifice can be a very shallow and a fake love. And Jesus now explains why this is the case. Because he now says in verse 46, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? So the point here is, it's easy to love others who love you. That when someone is patient and kind with you, it's easy to be patient and kind to them. And it's easy to give to those who give to you. And it's easy to be warm and accepting of those who are warm and accepting of you. And why it's easy to do those things is because it costs nothing. There's no sacrifice. There's no testing. There's no cost in doing good to those who do good to you. Hence the big point, love your enemies, those who make your life hard, those who give you nothing, those who would never help you, and those who would only take at your expense. Because it is hard to love them. Hence why to love them comes at a cost, which is what makes it a sacrifice. And if you therefore do that, if you can love them despite the cost, then you really are loving them. That this is the true love spoken of before, and it's exactly what Jesus did for us. Because he showed what it is to love your enemies when he died for us. And us having now ourselves received that love, we now know what it is to be loved, even as enemies, to receive sacrificial love. And now having known it, experienced it, well, this is why we must now do the same. Not hating our enemies as the world does, not just loving those who loves us, as anyone can easily do that and does not show Christian love at all. Instead, loving those who don't love us. And when we do that, that is the kind of love that shows a church who knows and loves Jesus. That is loving the way Jesus loved us. Because as mentioned before, many churches will be welcoming to those who are easy to love. But for those who may be more difficult, or they come with trauma, and they come maybe with little to offer, then the love may not be there for those people. Because that kind of love to people who are more difficult to love, well, that comes at a cost. And what Jesus is saying to us, we need to be prepared to pay that cost if we're going to love the way that he loves us. That loving our enemies and those who are hard to love is a perfect example of true love because it is a sacrifice to do so. And if we do show this love, this will show something about us. And if we don't show this love, that will also show something about us as well. Because we actually get a big warning in our last passage that this kind of love that God shows us, it's not optional for us to now do it once we have received it and experienced it. And in fact, if we do not show this sacrificial love, then that would be a good indicator that we don't actually know God and his sacrificial love. Because we see it say here in 1 John 4 verse 19, we love because he first loved us. So there's the big point there. Love comes from God. And this is how we can now love. That none of us could ever love in a sacrificial way or love God himself if not for him first loving us when we were his enemies. Because as we saw before, when we were sinners, that is when Jesus died for us. So we clearly did not love God first, nor did he love us in reward for our love to him, but instead he made the first move as we have been loved by him, and now because of that, we can now love as well. Which is where the big warning comes from. Because he now says, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. So the warning now is, how can you claim to love God if you hate others? How can you claim to know God's love if it stops with you and that kind of sacrificial true love does not get passed on? There has to be something very wrong with your attitude and understanding of just what it is that you have been given. Because it's a bit like, say, hanging off a cliff. And someone comes up and they save you. They pull you up. They save your life. And if you've been saved and you're so thankful for it, and you claim to love the person who loved you enough to save you, even at risk to themselves, well, how could you then turn around to another person hanging off a cliff and simply say, well, let them fall? I'm not going to help them. Why would I do that? Because if you've been saved and you've been shown sacrificial love, and you actually understand and appreciate what it is that you have been given, then to not do the same for others shows a cold-heartedness that is simply cruel and selfish. That the life-saving gift that you were given, it's really had no impact on you. And likewise, the warning here is that if you know Jesus's sacrificial love, then there's no way that you cannot love others the way you have been loved by him. Because as we also see in this chapter said a couple of times, it says God is love. That this is what he is. And as he is love, then this is why he is the source of love. That all love comes from him. So if you know God, then you must become loving like he is. Like standing in front of a fire in winter. You warm up because you're near what is the source of heat. That you can't stand in front of a fire and stay cold. The heat, it transfers to you. And likewise, if you stand before God, this God who is love, his love radiates onto you as well. You also can't remain cold when you are near the source of all love. Which is why this love is such an important thing to be seen in Christians and seen in churches. Hence why our passage even ends by saying, and he has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. It says this because it really is that important. If we know the sacrifice Jesus made for us, if we've seen the sacrificial love of God, then now knowing this love of God means that we must now love others in a real, authentic way. It has to change us. And that love is going to be authentic. It is going to be real. It's not something that you can put on. It's not something that you can fake. You can't do that. Because false love is just an act of it. But it's not real love. And the actions mean nothing if it's not real, as it's not done as a true sacrificial love. It's just the kind patience that we spoke of before. It's just doing that 1 Corinthians 13 stuff with no depth. But if being made like Jesus, understanding his sacrificial love, then it's going to change us. And whilst we're not going to be perfect on this side of heaven, as we're not going to fully be like Jesus now, we're still far from being perfect. The important thing is that we're actually being changed and becoming like him. We're changing to be like him and changing every day. And if we're becoming more like Christ, then we will love as he does. So if you see the poor and needy, you won't say, good luck with that, wish you well. Instead, you'll do something to help them. And when you do something to help them, you'll do it out of genuine love and not to be seen by others, not to boast about what you have done. Instead, it will be a true act of love that comes at a cost to yourself because you have faith in Jesus, so you've been changed by him, and now you'll start to live like him. That we come to love others because we're now connected to what is the source of love. That we now know God, and as Jesus made that happen, we start to love just like him. But just as important as not putting on an empty show is that we don't use empty words. Because it's all good to speak of love. Love your neighbor. We're all very loving. We're a loving church. But you actually have to be genuine. You have to do it. Like I said at the start, our world speaks of love. It celebrates it as a good thing. And yet when you look at the love it promotes, it does not sacrifice. But it only looks to be nice, just to make people happy. But what we've seen here is what true godly love looks like. And that comes from knowing him, who is love, and then when you know it, showing it to others. That's the big point being made here. God is love, and if you know him, then you'll show that love to others as well. whatever the cost of doing that might be. So to finish up, the main thing for us to be doing is to make sure that we all know what real love is. That we must not make the mistake of seeing love as just being nice. Not just reading 1 Corinthians 13 going, oh, love is this. Okay, I'll be that. I'll just do those things. We can't be like that because love has to come from inside and flow out. Not be the act first, as the external act, that won't change the heart. And real love has to be a sacrifice for others. And not just a convenience that then gets pulled back when it gets hard. Because that's the world's love. That's the Hollywood love, the Disney love. I'll love you as long as it's easy to do and I benefit from it. So I will be patient and kind as long as you are being those things to me. In fact, we see that in so many relationships in this world. There is, unfortunately, a lot of big attitude, a lot of people, I'll love you whilst you make me happy. Whilst it's good for me, it works for me. But get sick or hurt and become hard to love, and I'm no longer happy, well, then the love will stop. It doesn't go that far. No sacrifice, no doing anything for the benefit of others, just a transactional and convenient love that only lasts as long as it costs nothing and you might even benefit from it. But real love is shown to us by God, and that did come at a cost. Jesus died for us. And it was only by sacrificial love that happened and the gospel came to be. And once we know that, then we must love others as he has loved us. And only by knowing that, we'll be able to love others just like him. And then as a Christian, we'll love those around us even when it's hard. And as a church, we'll love those around us even when it's hard. We won't just pull it back looking for convenience. Because that change mentioned before that we all need, it can only come from knowing the sacrificial love that Jesus made for us. That this is what showed us what true love is. And now that we know it, we must live it. So if we want to know love, the main point is we must know God. Know what Jesus has done for us. And it's then by coming to know and to understand that we then love others just as we have been loved by him.